Hello, and welcome to Young Heretics' 100th episode Bonanza edition. Hooray! You guys, we made it to 100 episodes. I do not have any confetti or party hats to wear or anything like that, but know that in my heart I am tossing confetti all over the room. Really is amazing to me to think about the fact that we are 100 episodes into this journey together. I don't think when I thought up the idea for the show and was sort of like, I guess I would like to do a podcast. I always say, and this is really true, that when people told me you should have a podcast, you're good at writing, you should have a podcast, I thought all right, fine. If you want everybody has a podcast. So I'm just going to do the podcast that I want to do. And, I'm not going to try to make it super current eventsy, and I'm not going to try to make it as big as I possibly can make it. I'm just going to talk about the good stuff of the West. I'm going to kick out all this stupid identity politics nonsense. I'm just going to give people the high quality, great works of literature, philosophy, history, poetry that they've been missing out on because the culture wars have basically just obscured everything. Right? That was the idea. And I thought 5 people were going to listen to me talk about Homer, right? This is the thing is, you make something in the sort of media world, and it's kind of a commonplace that in order to get eyeballs on the internet, in order to get attention, you have to cheapen stuff. You have to throw red meat to the crowd, or you have to play to certain demographics or whatever. And I was just not into doing any of that. And so I thought, well, this is just going to be a passion project. And the thing that I discovered is that you hold the great works of the West out there, and it's sort of like food. It's like nourishment. You're holding it out. You're saying, is anybody hungry? And it turned out people devour the food, because they're so hungry, because we are all, I think, so starved for real substantive discussion of the good, the true, and the beautiful, and the traditions that have carried it down to us generation to generation for thousands of years. And so that's what this show is. And it has exceeded my wildest dreams, the way that you guys have responded and reached out. And the enthusiasm, the excitement, and what you've taught me as well about what needs doing in this world, what I'm here for on this earth, has just been such a huge part of my career and of my life over the past few years. I'm already getting a little emotional. We're going to save some of the really fun, retrospective stuff for the second half of this show. But I did just want to start out by saying this. I'm so grateful to you. I'm so glad that you've been with me on this journey. I'm most humbled and moved that you want me in your actual lives. Because people always say the pundits in the media, they're quote unquote leaders, right? Thought leaders. But I don't think of myself as a leader really at all. I think of myself as a standard bearer, because you are out there, right? Living your real life, raising kids, starting families, farming, going to work as cops and butchers and teachers and all these things. I'm not listing those sort of randomly off the top of my head. I'm naming things that I know you're out there doing. And that is the stuff of the West. That's the stuff of life, right? The keeping the home fires burning, and enacting the high principles of the good, the true, and the beautiful in your life, right? That's what's going to keep the West alive. And so I'm here essentially to try and offer you something that you can use in that important work. And so I'm so honored that you actually want me in that life, right? That you want me in your ear while you're mowing your lawn, while you're getting ready for bed, while whatever it is that you do while you listen, right? I just really feel incredibly a huge responsibility and a huge gratitude that you've taken me in that way, and that I've become part of your headspace and your world. And so I wanted to take some time in this episode to just appreciate that and to look back on the journey the show's been on, where it's going from here. But first and foremost, I do always want to give you something substantive. So I didn't just want to be patting myself on the back and patting you on the back. And I thought it might be a good time to take stock of what I call the state of the West. You have the State of the Union, right? You have the kind of annual check-in from the president about what's going on in the country. We had that. It was kind of a dud this year. And I would like to deliver what I think of as where are we? Where are we going? And what do we need? So that's what I'm going to talk about. And I one of the things I like about this is that I quickly started discovering as I did this show that a classical education is not just a chronological, well, first Aristotle, well, first Socrates, then Plato, then Aristotle, then the Hellenistic philosophers. Like there's some of that, and we do talk about the passage of time and chronology on this show, but it's also kind of like a web or a network, right? And it's hard to get your foot in the door because if you start, there's all these references and there's things that people always say to me, like, I don't know how to understand the references in these classic books. And I always say, just start somewhere, right? And that's basically what we did. We started with the Iliad, and I have not been going in like rigorous chronological order. We've been tracking some series throughout, and we've been situating ourselves. But as you start to build the network of things that you're familiar with, as you start to learn about, well, here's Plato and here's Solzhenitsyn, and it's like little lights come on. You see those maps of America where the lights are kind of interconnected with one another. And every time we do an episode, we just turn on one of those lights and we're starting to build together a network of understanding so that when we come to a new book or a new poem or a new play, we don't just come in blind. We realize that it lives in the context of this long, long story, and we live in the context of that story. And so now we have kind of a shared vocabulary of passages and ideas that we've explored in a million different ways. And one of the things I want to do today is show how some of those most urgent passages and most urgent ideas are kind of pointing us in a certain direction for our understanding of our present moment. We're always talking about the crisis of our present moment as if none of this has ever happened before. But if there's anything that I want you to take away from this classical education that you didn't know you were missing, right? It's that we have been here before. We have been up against these crises before, and that many of the debates we are having are like fumbling in the dark because we're touching on these profound issues of what it means to be human, what it means to be free, and when we don't know, or we've forcibly denied that there's a huge history and a wellspring of knowledge on these very questions, on these profound, base level questions about what is man, what is it to be human. And so I'd like to sort of take stock of what we've learned so far, and of where we need to be going. There really is no better gift than paint your life. It's a beautiful reproduction that they make. They really do a great job. What they do is they take your photos from your phone, from your like computer, wherever you have them just sitting around, because we all take all these pictures now, but we never do anything with them. And if you send your picture into Paint Your Life, they will match you up with a real life professional artist. This is not done digitally. And they will make a really wonderful hand rendered original portrait of it. I've got mine in the back, beautiful little painting of Chad Cat, my cat when he was a kitten. I totally love it. It's part of my studio. But you can do anything. You can do, somebody that is no longer with you that you want to remember, maybe a photograph of a great trip you took. It's just awesome, either for yourself or as a gift. Highly recommend it. And if you are a Young Heretics listener, you get a special deal. When you text the word heretics to 64,000, that's the word heretics, Heretics, to the number 64,000, you can get 20% off your painting, which is a great deal, a big chunk of money off. And there's no risk because if you don't love it, your money will be refunded. But I do think you're going to love it. Text the word heretics to 64,000. Message and data rates may apply. Terms apply. Available at paintyourlife.com/terms. One more time, text the word heretics to 64,000 for 20% off. So, the state of the West. I'd like to begin by reading to you a passage from Nietzsche. And this is a passage to which I've often referred, but I want to read you the whole thing. It's from The Gay Science, and it's section 125, and it's called The Madman. Here's Nietzsche, the madman. Have you ever heard of the madman who on a bright morning lighted a lantern and ran to the marketplace, calling out unceasingly, I seek God, I seek God. As there were many people standing about who did not believe in God, he caused a great deal of amusement. Why, is he lost? Said one. Has he strayed away like a child? Said another. Or does he keep himself hidden? Is he afraid of us? Has he taken a sea voyage? Has he emigrated? The people cried out laughingly, all in a hubbub. The insane man jumped into their midst and transfixed them with his glances. Where is God gone? He called out. I mean to tell you, we have killed him. You and I, we are all his murderers. But how have we done it? How were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the whole horizon? What did we do when we loosened this earth from its sun? Whither does it now move? Whither do we move? Away from all suns? Do we not dash on unceasingly, backwards, sideways, forwards, in all directions? Is there still an above and below? Do we not stray as through infinite nothingness? Does not empty space breathe upon us? Has it not become colder? Does not night come on continually, darker and darker? Shall we not have to light lanterns in the morning? Do we not hear the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we not smell the divine putrefaction? For even gods putrefy. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we console ourselves, the most murderous of all murderers? The holiest and the mightiest that the world has hitherto possessed has bled to death under our knife. Who will wipe the blood from us? With what water could we cleanse ourselves? What lustrums, what sacred games shall we have to devise? Is not the magnitude of this deed too great for us? Shall we not ourselves have to become gods merely to seem worthy of it? Obviously, that's a very famous passage. God is dead, right? And it's frequently pointed out that Nietzsche wasn't exactly celebrating this fact. He was, in fact, as you read in this passage, he was grappling with the enormity of it, which nobody around him understood. And this is what drove him mad. What drove him mad is that he saw the light, the vigor, the energy draining out of traditional Christian belief and belief in God, and not even just traditional Christianity, but all Heidegger pointed out that it was all transcendence, right? Everything that was ultimate and final, which we talk about when we talk about God. And it had flattened the world. It meant there was nothing above the head of a human being, because there was nothing outside of ourselves toward which we could refer. And so when you read this passage, what it really is, it's actually kind of seasonally appropriate as we draw near to the end of Lent. It's the cry. It's the cry of a man in the days between the crucifixion and the resurrection. It's the cry of a man who has put God in the tomb, and he doesn't know how to bring him back, right? This whole Nietzsche's whole career was he just tried to make people see that if you obliterate some, the transcendent standard of divine will, then you basically make of yourself a kind of miniature God who has no direction, no North Star, no way to go. And the point that I want to make in this speech, this defense of the West, this state of the West, is that Nietzsche himself didn't really know this, and many people now would doubt it. But I believe that this too is part of the Western story, just as the 3 days between the crucifixion and the resurrection are part of the Western story. We go through what's called dark nights of the soul, and we in the West are in one now. We cannot see our way outside material, outside of matter. We can't see our way back to believing sincerely without feeling embarrassed about it. We've been told that belief in the supernatural is primitive, that it's unscientific, and that leaves us in this position of having to reign over ourselves and create some form of meaning. And everything that we are doing, all the wokeness, all of the sort of even the crazy far right stuff, where we enter into this sort of racialist conspiracy or whatever. All of this maddening form of politics that we're involved in is really a maddening form of religion. And it's casting about the effort to make gods of ourselves in order to become worthy of the deed of killing God. Ultimately, of course, this effort will fail. And we're seeing the ways that it fails, the way that it makes monsters out of us, and what it turns us into. So I want to talk about that in a little bit. And then I want to talk about resurrection, right? This is the diagnosis of the West, is that we are living through a period that is akin to the period between the death of God and his resurrection, because he always, always comes back to life. But but we are God killers, right? And one of the ways that we have now killed God is by eliminating him, denying him in our life, right? Denying that there is any objective standard of morality, denying that there's any natural good for the human person so that we can just rearrange our bodies and transhumanize ourselves at will. And so I want to talk about what that does to us. And we've visited several passages that I think speak eloquently about this. So I'm going to resurrect, so to speak, a few of them here. The first of which is from René Girard, the French. He was at Stanford for the important parts of his career. This scholar who writes about mimesis and mimetic rivalry. But this is a passage actually responding to Nietzsche. Girard writes, "To bury the modern concern for victims under millions and millions of corpses, there you have the National Socialist way of being Nietzschean. But some will say, this interpretation would have horrified poor Nietzsche. Probably yes. Nietzsche shared with many intellectuals of his time and our own a passion for irresponsible rhetoric in the attempt to get one up on opponents. But philosophers, for their misfortune, are not the only people in the world. Genuinely mad and frantic people are all around them and do them the worst turn of all. They take them at their word." It's an absolutely scathing passage, and even for me, it's a little hard on Nietzsche. But the point that people actually take philosophers at their word. And philosophers are often playing word games, or they're just, trying to sound sophisticated. But people take philosophers at their word. And this is what, in fact, he says, was the horror of the 20th century. It was basically saying, well, if there is no God, right, then all of this moral intuition that we have built up over centuries, the moral intuition that weakness needs protecting, the moral intuition that human life is sacred and valuable, right? All of that is now just false coding. It's just mixed signals that we have from a bygone old era. And so we need to cast it out, and we need instead to be strong and realist, right? And this is effectively what becomes of a religion of strength, because when you take God away, God who loves the weak, right, then the world only teaches you to love strength and to worship power. And this, says Girard, is basically the driving motivation behind the horrors of fascism and Stalinism and Hitler, right? All of the things that we look back with horror on the 20th century, and that we have discussed at some length, right? These are driven essentially by a terrible need, right, to drive God out of our hearts, and not just out of our philosophies, right, but out of the moral universe that he has built for us. Because we think, oh, it's all just common sense. Of course you don't kill babies. Really? Tell that to the Spartans, right? The Spartans are very civilized people. They killed babies. They practiced euthanasia the way we do, right? In this country now, as we are aborting millions upon millions of babies, right? What is that? It's a pagan practice, because who teaches you that all persons are created in the image of God? None other than God himself in the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? And so when you wipe that out, or when you declare it dead, then of course you have to beat out of yourself all that years and generation of teaching. And this is what Girard says happened. And we read too, I'm going to read you another passage that was incredibly stirring for me when we were talking about the Gulag Archipelago. And he's talking here about Vyshinsky, who was sort of Stalin's main interpreter of so-called justice. Here's Solzhenitsyn. He's writing here about 1937, which is the height of the Great Purge of Stalin's sort of inter-party enemies. It turns out that in that terrible year, Andrei Yanuaryevich Vyshinsky, availing himself of the most flexible dialectics of a sort nowadays not permitted either Soviet citizens or electronic calculators, since to them yes is yes and no is no, pointed out in a report which became famous in certain circles that it is never possible for mortal men to establish absolute truth, but relative truth only. He then proceeded a further step, which jurists of the last 2,000 years had not been willing to take, that the truth established by interrogation and trial could not be absolute, but only, so to speak, relative. Therefore, when we sign a sentence ordering someone to be shot, we can never be absolutely certain, but only approximately in view of certain hypotheses and in a certain sense that we are punishing a guilty person. Thence arose the most practical conclusion that it was useless to seek absolute evidence, for evidence is always relative, or unchallengeable witnesses, for they can say different things at different times. The proofs of guilt were relative, approximate, and the interrogator could find them even when there was no evidence and no witness, without leaving his office, basing his conclusions not only on his own intellect, but also on his party sensitivity, his moral forces. I've been stressing to you, I think, throughout our time together, that this idea of sort of ending absolute truth, right, which comes in the form of the death of God, which is what Nietzsche was observing and talking about, right? Um, as Gerard says, people take that seriously. If you tell them that, if you tell people that there's really no such thing as good or bad, but thinking makes it so, um, and they believe you, then they act sophisticated and become murderers, right? To bury the concern for victims under millions and millions of corpses. That's what Gulag essentially is, just like the Nazi concentration camps, right? All things are relative. Without God, right? We it's really just about our moral virtue, right? And that's, of course, the assertion of oneself as the final moral standard, becoming God. Um, what I'm essentially arguing is that this problem is everywhere in our neuroses, right? From the assertion that men can be women to the assertion that the West, is just as it must fall because Putin is better than the West, right? To the idea that, like, we just need to build a future for the white race. All of these different political attitudes of extremism, some of which, believe me, some of those are more in power and more to be concerned about than others, right? I think wokeness is by far the greatest threat that faces us. But all of this, right? They're all the same people. They're all suffering under the same stuff. And that is the desire to assert oneself, to desperately find some source of final authority. And if it's not going to be God, it has to be you or the strongest person there. It has to either be you yourself. I can declare myself a woman. I can declare myself a man. Or it has to be daddy, right? It has to be the government, which is the strongest thing on earth. It has to be Dr. Fauci giving you a final, ultimate authority on truth, right? It has to be Joe Biden telling you that now, we need regime change in Russia. Or it has to be Q, right? It has to be QAnon telling you that actually it's, August 13th, Trump is coming back. And actually Trump is going to be the final power that brings all things to rights, right? Without God, we're all just trapped in this same bind, the same thing. And the heart of it, the image of it, and the central indicator of it is this breakdown of language. Because what is language if not a reference to absolute truth outside of us? Well, if it's not that, then it's just an instrument of power. So I'm going to read to you one more passage from way before and Nietzsche saw any of this, from outside the Christian tradition, Thucydides, the description of the revolution and civil war at Corcyra, another passage I have read to you before. I love delivering ads for the Ancient Language Institute because it's like, it's not an ad. I'm giving you a gift. There truly is, I can't think of a better gift you could give to yourself or to your kids than a lifelong engagement with the ancient languages that made the West what it is. I'm talking about Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, biblical Hebrew. And these are the languages, of course, of Aristotle and Cicero and Virgil, but also of the Bible, if you want to get a deeper engagement with scripture, with that real, face-to-face understanding, that deep grasp. These are the languages that they teach at the Ancient Language Institute. And those works, those great works, are what you will be reading as soon as possible. This is why I love these guys. They really know their stuff, but they're not going to beat you over the head with like arcane, Picayune points of grammar before they get you reading. These were, when they were used, these were living languages, of course. And so they want you to understand and experience the feel of the languages and the way that they were used to convey the great ideas about the true, the good, and the beautiful. They have a special deal just for my listeners. When you go to ancientlanguage.com/heretics, that's ancientlanguage.com/heretics, you'll get a 10% discount on tuition. Classes are available for all skill levels, but they always fill up really quick. So go quickly to ancientlanguage.com/heretics and get your 10% discount. So in this sedition and in this civil breakdown, Thucydides writes, words had to change their ordinary meaning and to take that which was now given them. Reckless audacity came to be considered the courage of a loyal supporter, prudent hesitation, specious cowardice. Moderation was held to be a cloak for unmanliness. Ability to see all sides of a question became incapacity to act on any. Frantic violence became the attribute of manliness, cautious plotting a justifiable means of self-defense. The advocate of extreme measures was always trustworthy, his opponent a man to be suspected. And I have said before, right, that this is the situation that we are trending towards, that we're trying to create, that our woke ideologues want a situation in which they, having power, can set the limits and the definitions of words. Why? Because words are tools for conveying truth. They're not useful in and of themselves, right? The sounds that I'm making right now are just noise to you, unless they refer to something real, either my internal experience of the world, what I believe to be true about the external realities about the world. But if none of those things are absolute, right? If there is no final truth, no ultimate cause, no unmoved mover, then all we are doing with our words is gaining power over one another. And that is the sign of political chaos. If you if you don't think that this is what we are currently trending toward, right, then I invite you to read some of the ways that we have redefined women. We talked about this very recently, right? Menstruators, chest feeders. What are these words for? Why are we talking this way? Not because we think that, like, it refers to some absolute truth, but because we're trying to define something out of existence. We're trying to unmake the existence of women. And the way that we're doing this is not by violence, although violence follows quickly upon relativism of this kind, but first by seizing control of the language. It's our most important fight, as you don't need me to tell you. But what you might need me to tell you is that all of this, from kneeling to the BLM fists to lighting a prayer candle to Stacey Abrams, is all because of the feeling that religion has failed to deliver. And so instead we need our own, right? We have to kick God out and set up a state establishment of secular religion and secular faith. And the thing is, in that world, all you can worship is power. Power is the law of this world. It is in a purely physical existence, force wins, right? That's simply the law. You talk about natural, spontaneous, natural things, right? That force winning is almost by definition the most natural thing in the world. And so words, if they are just handmaidens to force, right? If speech really is violence and violence really is speech, well, then, what should we do except use words to establish our own religion? So let's talk about some of the ways, right, in which we're trying to do this, to define people and classes and undesirables out of existence, right? Here is Justin Trudeau during the trucker protests, when he was on the verge of using emergency powers to freeze bank accounts, to, just to quash dissent, essentially. Why is it that we have lost our sense, lost our way, not just in America, but in the West, right? In the Anglosphere and in the West. Why have we lost the sense that individuals have a right to speak? Well, here's Trudeau. The people of Ottawa don't deserve to be harassed in their own neighborhoods. They don't deserve to be confronted with the inherent violence of a swastika flag on a street corner, or a Confederate flag, or the insults and jeers just because they're wearing a mask. That's not who Canadians are. Now think about that for a second, right? You saw the images of those protests. I saw them. The vast majority of people were flying Canadian flags. And sometimes, of course, as always, all movements attract kooks. But what Trudeau is doing here is he's trying to restructure reality so that the people whom he is about to oppress do not exist. They're not Canadians. They're unpersoned. They don't have rights, right? Why is he doing that? Not because he's some scheming supervillain, right? We think of Stalin must have been this uniquely evil person. No, just a human being deprived of God, just a human being leading without God. The natural implication is that what you're going to do is use language to restructure reality, and in the restructuring of reality, commit violence and commit political oppression. What is the fullest expression of this in our time? It's abortion, right? We've read this passage before too, but here's Justice Sotomayor in the arguments of Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, right? Virtually every state, says Sotomayor, defines a brain death as death. Yet the literature is filled with episodes of people who are completely and utterly brain dead, responding to stimuli. There's about 40% of dead people who, if you touch their feet, the foot will recoil. There are spontaneous acts by brain dead people. So I don't think that a response to pain by a fetus necessarily proves that there's a sensation of pain or that there's consciousness. Note the illusion here, right, between brain dead people and developing fetuses in the womb, right? The fact that this unimpeded growth will eventually lead to full human consciousness is as nothing, right, compared to this flattening idea that all we are is different configurations of atoms bouncing off of one another. And if that's true, then really it's all about the convenience of the powerful, right? It's all about what you want and what you're able to accomplish. And of course, once we get right down to it, right, what's convenient? Well, all humanity is inconvenient. Humanity is being bound in the body to the soul and to God, right? And so this is why, as I've been stressing, all of this is ultimately trending toward transhumanism. The abortion stuff is trending toward the artificial wombs, which is trending toward the abolition of gender, which is trending toward maximal transgenderism, right? And all of these things are interconnected because they come from the death of God, right? You remove that plank and suddenly you see, right? What I'm trying to do here is to knit together these threads so that you understand that there is no way out of confronting the death of God, right? There is no way out of asking ourselves whether this bill of goods we've been sold, that ultimate truth and high moral principle and the creator of the world are just outdated, old-fashioned, hokey things that we should be embarrassed to believe in, or whether they are the essential sine qua non, the thing we must have if we want to rebuild a life that is coherent and resist becoming monsters like the Stalinist purgers or the revolutionaries at Corcyra. This is why I return now at long last to the abolition of man, right? C.S. Lewis's set of speeches in which he basically foresaw all of this because he understood the logic that was at play. He said, those who write on social matters have not yet learned to imitate the physicists by always including time among the dimensions in order to understand fully what man's power over nature, and therefore the power of some men over other men, really means. We must picture the race extended in time from the date of its emergence to that of its extinction. Each generation exercises power over its successors, and each, insofar as it modifies the environment bequeathed to it and rebels against tradition, resists and limits the power of its predecessors. This modifies the picture, which is sometimes painted, of a progressive emancipation from tradition and a progressive control of natural processes, resulting in a continual increase of human power. In reality, of course, if any one age attains by eugenics and scientific education the power to make its descendants what it pleases, all men who live after it are the patients of that power. They are weaker, not stronger. For though we may have put wonderful machines in their hands, we have preordained how they are to use them. And if, as is almost certain, the age which has thus attained maximum power over posterity were also the most emancipated from tradition, it would be engaged in reducing the power of its predecessors almost as drastically as that of its successors. The real picture is that of one dominant age, let us suppose the 100th century AD, which resists all previous ages most successfully and dominates all subsequent ages most irresistibly, and thus is the real master of the human species. I think we are living in a moment when there has arisen an oligarchic class which is making a serious bid at becoming these masters, right? The technology is clicking into place to placate you with metaversal fantasies, to denature and drug you out of your own natural responses to things, and to offer you unlimited control while actually taking control over you, right? That is why the metaverse is so horrifying to us. It's not because virtual reality is inherently bad. It's because we look at Mark Zuckerberg walking down a row of placated people with glasses on, and we see, right, that this is not a person who has our humanity or our best interests at heart. This is a person who can make money off of basically anesthetizing us, right? And so what is the answer to this, right? Now that I've sort of laid out all of these semi-dystopian, disastrous prospects, right? We're not going backward. We're not going to remake the medieval world. We're not going to remake the Garden of Eden, right? The whole point of being exiled from Eden is that we have to find our way through this. We have to find our way through the 3 days when Christ is in the tomb, right? Because that's part of the West too. The resurrection, right? The fall of the Roman Empire and the picking, the sort of recapture of republicanism in the American Revolution. These casting forths of the light that's about to go out, right? And picking it up generations down the line, right? That's part of the West too. The West is central to the West is the idea of resurrection. And we don't actually know, right, what's going to happen. I mean, we don't know, right? We don't know if we're going to just capitulate further and further to this unhuman, anti-human ideology and go into a deeper dark night of the soul, or whether there'll be a revival in our lifetimes. But whether there is or not, right, remember Jesus, remember Socrates, remember that even if you die for it, the truth is the thing that will win out in the end. Right? So what is the thing that we ought to be holding fast to, whether we win or lose? What is the thing that we cannot do without? I'm going to read to you now one more passage from Aristotle's De Anima, Aristotle on the Soul. And this is something that I think we could stand to recover, right? This is the thing that we probably need to hold on to no matter what new technology emerges, no matter what nightmarish scenarios are proposed to us. Here's Aristotle on the soul. I'm going to read him slowly because Aristotle is always hard to parse, right? If an eye were an animal, its soul would be sight, since this would be the substance of the eye corresponding to the account. The eye is the matter of sight. If sight is lost, it is no longer an eye, except homonymously, in the way that a stone eye or painted eye is. What has been said in the case of parts must, of course, be understood as applying to the entire living body, for there is an analogy. As one part is to one part, so the whole perceptual faculty is to the whole of the body, which is capable of perception, insofar as it is capable of perception. The body which has cast off its soul is not a being which is potentially such as to be alive. This is rather the one which has a soul. Seed, therefore, however, and the fruit is such a body in potentiality. Heady stuff, but here's the point, right? If sight is the soul of the eye, then life in abundance, and human life, the human experience of the world, of our memories, of our desires, our fears, our ambitions, our dreams, right? Those things which are the faculty of the soul, right? That is what our bodies exist to do. And if you cut that out, if you wipe it away, right? What's the point of anything? Everything that is valuable about us exists in the consciousness of the human soul, which looks out upon the world and calls it good, which acts as co-creator with God, which names the animals, right? And so any change or evolution that we might make is not to be evaluated in terms of like, can we make this bigger, better metaverse? Can we build this better thing? But does it make us more or less connected to our humanity, which is our nature as embodied souls, right? The things that we are to furiously and fundamentally reject, the removal of power over our own lives that comes with things like, centralizing cryptocurrency, the removal of connection to our own spiritual experiences, which comes from reducing everything to matter, right? Recovering the sense that unless you are a soul in a body, you don't matter at all, right? There is no middle ground. There's no like, oh, well, we don't have souls, but we can have pleasure, right? What's pleasure? Who cares about pleasure? Who cares about your own pleasure compared to the pleasure of the powerful, right? And so insisting upon the embodied humanity, which is not going to get wished away. It's not going to get coded out of existence. It's not going to be like surpassed or disproven or debunked, right? It is what we are, souls and bodies, spirits and treasure in clay jars, right? And unless we are clinging to that, then we're not defending the West at all. It's possible that we will descend into something like dystopia. There's no guarantee against that. No man knows the day or the hour. Things do die. All human things fall apart. But the West is not a human thing. And the 3 days that are spent in the tomb, right, are bleak and ugly and bearable only because we know how it ends, right? Here's a last reading from T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, which talks about this, I think. This is starting at line 359. Who is the third who walks always beside you? When I count, there are only you and I together, but when I look ahead up the white road, there is always another one walking beside you, gliding wrapped in a brown mantle, hooded. I do not know whether a man or a woman, but who is that on the other side of you? We may have killed God, my friends, but he does not stay dead. And getting over our sense that this is just something, we can wish away or something we can, wait out, right, is the first step to saving the West. We have to understand that unless we are souls in bodies, we are nothing. And unless there is a God, we are not souls in bodies. Cling fast to this with me. We're going to talk more about it in the coming weeks and months. And if you head over to Locals, there's one more thing that I really want to tell you about. I can only tell Locals VIPs because it's kind of still in the works and still secret. But go to youngheretics.com/locals. And we're going to talk about how to take this further in the here and now. There's a special promotion for this. We're giving 3 months free, which is a big deal. When you use the promo code announcement, ANNOUNCEMENT, you will become privy before anybody else to a secret announcement about how we're going to take this further. youngheretics.com/locals. Join us there. It's a great community for a million other reasons, but especially if you want to be first in on the announcement that I have for what's going to happen going forward. All right. Having done all of that, we're going to have some fun. I want to tell you about the longest running magazine in the world, and that is The Spectator. They are particularly great these days because they don't let any identity politics nonsense in. And they're not hyper partisan, although many great conservative writers are there. They're just about intelligent conversation and thought, from the war in Ukraine to the ideological war in the classroom, from the rise of inflation to the rise of cancel culture. The Spectator has been dedicated to stimulating reporting and analysis since 1828, and the US edition has just newly come ashore. It's all the same high quality writing and analysis you love for US audiences. If you are a Young Heretics listener, you can have a special gift of 3 free months. That's a ton of time, plus full digital access, and most importantly, a free Spectator hat. All you do is you go to spectatorworld.com/special offer and use the offer code Heretics. You got to use that code Heretics to get your 3 free months at spectatorworld.com/special offer. This is where I go for high quality writing that is consistently above the board, raises its head above the noise, and really, brings you into contact with some of the greatest writers living. It's really just a can't miss reading. Go to spectatorworld.com/special offer and use offer code Heretics. So the next thing that I thought it would be fun to do is, since we've been around for 100 episodes, and since this show has taken on such a wonderful life, and you guys have been such a wonderful part of it, I sent out a call on Twitter to talk about the first episode that you remember encountering of Young Heretics. I said, what was the first episode you discovered? I want to hear about your first experience with the show. And I've picked a few of these that people said how they discovered the show. And I'm just going to listen back. My producers have selected some clips from some of these episodes. I'm just going to sort of, I'm not prepared for this. I have not chosen the clips myself. A lot of these episodes I haven't watched since they came out, but I just want to sort of revisit it and see how far the show has come and talk about where we've been and where we're going. So obviously a bunch of you said episode 1. Here's the Huns says episode 1, although I'm not sure if I heard about it from your Twitter or your non-related fathers podcast first. I've been a loyal listener and chaotic force ever since. This is true. The Huns is the best on locals. He's just roasts me all the time, which I do enjoy. And here's AJ, been listening since day one. You articulate clearly what classics can teach us about our modern society. You've opened my eyes on a lot of timeless classics that I missed despite getting an English degree. Hey, that's awesome. I love to hear, especially when people, feel like they're getting more out of this that they didn't get in school or whatever. So thank you for that. Let's listen to a clip. I have not prepared for this. I haven't listened to it since we started, but listen to a clip from day 1. Hey, welcome to Young Heretics. My name is Spencer. This is my podcast, which feels a little bit insane to say. It's surreal. I think we announced maybe 2 months ago that I was going to do this show. And since then, obviously, coronavirus has thrown this enormous wrench into everything that everybody is doing, including this. So that meant this took a little bit longer to get to you than we thought it would. But also, we just wanted to make sure that it looks and sounds as good as it possibly can before we present it to you. And I'm also really grateful to you. Thanks for being here. Thank you for watching this first episode of the show, or listening to it, if you are listening to it. I'm Spencer. I'm an editor. I'm a writer. I'm a literary scholar. I work at the Claremont Institute, which is a really fantastic think tank out here in California. And really, I only have one thing to say about all of that stuff, all the sort of social justice warrior, race theory, queer theory, feminist theory, Western culture is racist, all of that. The only thing I have to say to you about it is that it's crap, right? And this happens all the time to people that love Western literature and Western culture and want to talk about it. We get so hung up on just defending it against the culture war crazies that we never actually spend time enjoying the literature itself. We're always arguing about why the literature isn't racist, or why it's not homophobic, or why it's not anti-feminist or whatever, or why it's okay to study it, even if there are complications and stuff. We spend so much time arguing about that we barely spend any time talking about actual literature, the actual literature that we're trying to defend and read. Because really what this is, right, it's like the academies of higher learning and the professors at those academies are standing in front of this vault, right, this vast treasure vault. And in the vault, there's gems and gold and jewels piled up high to the ceiling, and there's tables with rich food just laid on fine china, and there's all this fabulous wealth for free. That's what Western culture is like. That's what this huge wealth of literature and poetry and philosophy and history that comes down to us in the West. That's what it is. It's this enormous treasure trove. And the people that run our universities, they're standing in front of that treasure trove with the key, right? They're there to usher you into that tradition. And more, they're just saying, you know what, you don't need this key. You don't need to go inside. It takes work, and that's unfair. And maybe there's some racist or homophobic stuff in this vault, and you don't really have to go inside. And it's like, don't go inside. These people have lost their minds, right? I mean, increasingly, this is an actual kind of mania. And what I want to do, I just want to stop freaking out about that and just go inside the vault and just pick up treasures every week. That's what we're going to do. I also recommend learning Greek and reading them in the original, but that's obviously not for everybody. If you're on iTunes, if that's where you get your podcasts, then please do leave us a 5-star review. If you want to leave us a review that is anything other than 5-star, then keep it to yourself. Thank you so much for joining me. That is the end of episode 1 of Young Heretics. We will see you all next week. Well, we're kind of running out of time, actually. Sorry, I'm going to do that again.
Cool.
Well, I'm glad you think that I articulate clearly what classics can teach us. No, I actually look back on that very fondly, and my main first reaction is that I was a lot skinnier. I sort of got into lifting while I did this podcast, and let that be a lesson to you that you can put on muscle in a very short period of time. It only takes you 100 episodes of Young Heretics to get jacked. No, but I mean, I still actually I'm surprised and touched to see that the heart of the show really has stayed the same. That heart remains, which is this is still, I think, the best place to come. The Western culture treasure trove is still the best place to go for understanding with sanity and clarity what's going on. And we do get distracted from all of this just craziness and yelling that we do, and that even those of us who endorse the West don't spend enough time actually talking about what's in the great works of the West. And so, you know, I think it kind of came on gradually that what this is a classical education that the world is denying you. And so I think I thought of the show as having really changed in sort of its early weeks. But the heart of it is still really there, I think. And it's awesome to hear from all of you guys who have been with it since the very beginning. Okay, let's listen to another one from a little bit later on. Chris says, episode 17, Chaos. I then proceeded to binge the first 16 episodes, and God love you. That's excellent. I've heard from a lot of people that they binge the show, and I can't imagine like listening to myself for that long. But I guess because it's me, so I can't think of myself listening to myself that long. But I love the idea of being binged. And then other people say they'll listen to me on 2 times speed, but then I talk too fast, so they have to slow me down. And then some people say they just listen to like half an episode, they listen to over and over again. It's interesting to hear the different ways that people consume this show. I love Josh, my fiance, will get out of the gym, and sometimes I'll hear him listening to the show, and he listens on 2 times speed. So I sound like a really sort of chipmunky and fast. Anyway, thank you for binging, Chris. Thanks for being here. Let's listen to a piece of episode 17, Chaos. Welcome back to Young Heretics. Today, I want to talk about chaos, and I want to talk about Antifa. This is going to be kind of a big, sprawling episode. We're going to talk about a lot of different works of literature. Specifically, in particular, I'm going to focus on the Bacchae by Euripides. It's a great ancient Greek tragedy. I've mentioned it before on the show as something with a lot to say to our present moment, but we've never actually gone into it in detail. I think that this moment which we're in is a moment that sort of hits at the heart of something very deep in the history of the West, this flirtation with anarchy that we've got going on, where we're rioting in the streets, we're tearing statues down. Even those people, and even Antifa themselves, agree that the point of it is to break down the barriers of our society, because our society is unjust, and so the ways that it is structured need to be deconstructed. In the 1930s, Stalin issued a memo, essentially, saying, in order to combat the right, we are going to associate all forms of patriotism and nationalism with fascism. And this was emotionally a very effective technique because the 20th century was such a century of trauma, mostly because of actual fascism, right? Because of Mussolini and what happened in Italy, and of course because also of Hitler and these genuinely terrible hyper-nationalist movements. For our purposes, Seneca the Younger, who writes and lives around 50 AD, and Seneca influenced a ton of Renaissance tragedy, which we'll also eventually talk about, right? In the 14th, 15th century Europe, they're looking back to Seneca, but Seneca is looking back to Euripides and in fact rewriting some of Euripides' plays, which is why our man Euripides gets to decide sort of for all posterity what the true authentic version of the Dionysus myth is, and he gets kind of lifted up as this exemplar of great poetry after his death. So suck it, critics. For us too, and why we are interested in reading him, why we still have him. He kind of fell out of favor again in modernity, but he's recently had a resurgence precisely because he deals with these issues of chaos, right? He deals with these things that we are becoming kind of uncomfortably familiar with as well. And he deals with societies in decadence and decay because that's when he was living. But first, let me just pause. And as I always do, thank you for listening. It really is so much fun for me to do this show. And it's crazy that there are so many people listening. It's really lovely. And thank you for being with me on this journey. Each go da 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 da. So you have da 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 da. That's the speech. So I'm just going to read out the first part of this monologue in Greek, and hopefully you'll hear the musical rhythm or the meter of this iambic trimeter. Right. So here he walks on stage. He's absolutely enraged because his whole city is basically being overrun by these maddened women, these women driven mad, and one of them is his mother. It's sort of very embarrassing. He comes on, here's what he has to say. Ek demos on men taste tunghenon kthanos, kluodeneoch matain danaptolin kaka. Gynaikos heimin domat eklaloi penai, plastaisi bacheisen, endidaskiois, orasi thoas dein, tonneos de daimona, dionyson, hostis esti, timosas korois. That's what we're dealing with here with Euripides. We're not dealing with someone with magical powers. We're not dealing with somebody that's got his head in the clouds. We're dealing with a hard-nosed look at what a civilization in decay looks like. And what's intriguing is it is a civilization that has been taken over by the barbarians, by the forces of chaos and disaster as represented by Dionysus. That's true. But before it's that, it's a civilization that has forgotten the real reasons behind its success. I acknowledge there is a cost to civilization. I acknowledge it requires you to not do some things that you want, and yet still it is good. That's the conservative play here, right? That's the conservative advertisement. Thanks again. It's been a joy. I will see you next week for more truth, beauty, and the stuff that matters. First of all, much better look. It just has to be said. The beard was really rocking at that point. No, but actually, this was a really. I'm intrigued that this is an episode that came up for some people because was an important one in the development and the structure of the show. And it has to do with what I was saying at the beginning, that like, as we started to explore some of these texts together, we didn't have to just do like one text each time. We could also take this bigger, what you might call a diachronic view, right? We can kind of start to assemble these different pieces and understand how they fit together, and how Seneca is referring back to Euripides. And I remember that "suck it, critics" line as I think about the fact that people didn't like Euripides very much at all points in history. He wasn't always in favor. But yeah, I mean, this was obviously during the 2020 summer of riots, right? I was still living in LA. I was right outside my window watching the chaos unfold, and I was thinking about how, obviously we're up against a real like tear the walls down kind of moment. And conservatives sometimes, one of the themes I think that has developed on the show is like ways in which, I am a conservative, but I believe that there are weaknesses in the conservative model, which make us vulnerable to this kind of attack, this kind of exploitation. One is the desire to fit everything into systems, right? The inability to countenance that there might be variety in human life. And so then you get barbarians knocking on the door, and because if you're too tightly wound, they find it really easy to get in. So that's what that episode was kind of about, and I think we have developed those themes as we've gone, as we've moved forward. But it's fun to revisit it, and it's fun to think about, like, I don't think that I think that might be the first time that we did an episode that touched on multiple different sources and kind of talked about all these different texts. And since then, that's become one of my favorite kinds of episode to do, just because it builds that network, right? It creates those associations for us between like stuff that we've just done on one episode and stuff that we did like a long time ago. And this is helping me to remember, like, oh yeah, we did all these. And when I was going back to write that State of the West thing, going back to the things that we've revisited again and again, it was sort of helpful to figure out, like, what are the things that keep coming back to the front of one's mind. Okay, so in direct message, somebody mentioned to me the episode. He says, why Cardi B's WAP is not a good piece of art. And I do remember this, and it was I think somewhere around the 40s. My producers will have found it, but this is when I was talking about mimesis, right? And we were just starting one of the crucial central concepts that we've been talking about throughout our time together. I'm sort of introducing this idea that human beings are imitative animals, that we imitate by nature, and this is what accounts for art and accounts for civilization, and ultimately actually accounts also for our being as humans in the image of God. So let's hear a clip from this episode. So do you remember how a little while back I said that we were never going to do an episode about WAP? So I kind of lied. But I also didn't totally lie. This is not like 100% an episode about WAP, but it's a little bit about WAP. This is degraded, like singing openly about your like most sort of excessive sexual desires is like not good art, and it kind of sucks. And there followed this weird little firefight between like Ben Shapiro and Cardi B, which, like, that is not a timeline that any one of us expected to find ourselves on, but there we are. It happened, and I found it actually kind of revealing of a set of issues that are underlying a lot of our conversations about culture that we don't really have great equipment to handle. Because on the one hand, conservatives and even just people who want to kind of live decent lives, I think all have this intuition that like our pop art, a lot of it is really degraded. Like, never mind WAP, like if you've watched like any of Katy Perry's videos recently, especially if you watch the video for like Bon Appetit, which is just like, the premise of that song is like, my body is meat, that's literally the premise. And so I don't know, I feel on the one hand that most people sort of react to that and realize that there's something missing from that about what art ought to be. And yet at the same time, you also don't want to be that guy who's like, well, harumph, like no art should ever have nudity in it. The unfortunate fact that something which is bad in real life can succeed as something we want to look at. And this, I think, actually even goes back to the Republic, which is not, this part is not explicitly about art, but he tells the story of Leontius, who passes dead bodies and knows it's shameful to look at corpses, but can't resist, can't look away. And so he eventually turns to them and says, eyes, look your fill. He has this internal conflict. And that internal conflict is sort of later worked out in Aristotle's Poetics, which is a text that we've talked about before. This is really the first sustained work of literary criticism, in which he says, one of the reasons we know that mimesis, which is what he thinks art is, a kind of imitation, representation, reproduction, one of the reasons why we know that mimesis in itself is something essential to the human spirit is that we take pleasure in effective representation of things that are actually ugly and negative and bad. And so this presents exactly that puzzle, which is also expressed weirdly by Jordan Peterson, if you follow or know him, who talks about having a Soviet art collection. And he said things like, I keep them around because I've been obsessed with totalitarianism and the human capacity for atrocity. Living with them serves as a constant reminder of the subjugation of art to ideology and the horrors of the USSR. So this is, people have long been aware of this tension that the things depicted in art can be evil, and yet the art itself can have some of that power and that compelling just quality for which art is known. And so the reason that WAP, the reason that Cardi B's WAP is not a good song, is a degraded piece of art, is not because it deals frankly with human sexuality. Plenty of art. Milton's Paradise Lost deals frankly with human sexuality. There are as unblushing depictions as you would like of sex in some of the ancient texts, like Daphnis and Chloe, for example, right? Plenty of that. But the reason WAP is bad is because it conveys degraded and degrading sexual behavior as if it were fun, and as if in real life what it will lead you to is ever more pleasure and delight. Whereas in fact, in reality, especially if you don't have a gajillion dollars as Cardi B has to like fix all of your problems, especially if you don't have that untrammeled sexual energy released for everyone in a humiliating way, will only lead you to misery. This is just a sort of brute fact of life. And so if you don't convey that in the art that you make about sexuality, you're not being honest. You're misleading, and you're separating the pleasure of art, which is like, this, it's fun to listen to this music, it's nice. You're separating it from the instructive capacity of art, which is like just, that's lying, right? It's seductive and it's bad. And it does kind of degrade you to encounter that, especially, again, as a young person while you're impressionable and your soul is being formed. This is Young Heretics. I'm Spencer Klavan. See you next week for more truth, beauty, and the stuff that matters. It's really interesting watching these together and seeing the progression. I think that we got comfortable with each other at a certain point. And it feels to me like this is just us kind of coming into a deeper relationship, which is really lovely and beautiful. It's a funny experience doing a podcast and sitting on the other side of this kind of black eye, right? This camera that doesn't have any emotion. I'm just looking into it. But I know that on the other end of this are people, right? So many people with, really important concerns and desires and things they have to think about when they wake up. And you have to get used to, having that conversation. I think in this episode, we really kind of I'm starting to learn like what you guys are interested in. And this is where, that episode, I think one thing I like about it is that it draws out, the way in which the conversations we're having now, these sort of little firefights we're having between right and left, are actually just skimming on the surface of these profound issues that have been discussed, like in really deep ways, right? Leontius and Aristotle's Poetics, and you can really like when you get down to this stuff, it's like basically we're stumbling over old furniture. It's like, gosh, there sure is a lot of moral responsibility in art, isn't there? And it's like, oh, right, like yes, of course there is. And this, by the way, has only gotten worse, right? The stuff that we were talking about has only become more pronounced with this latest Disney announcement. I mean, one of the things that we get wrong is we think of the culture wars as two sides, one of which is the right fighting for traditional morality in art, and the other of which is the left fighting for no morality in art, right? No rules about what you can produce, nothing about what you can make and not make. And that maybe used to be true in like the 60s and 70s when the left was more about like just, art for art's sake, like say anything that you want, no restrictions. But that's actually, it's impossible to make art without moral content. And so it's actually morphed. The culture wars are actually about two competing visions, moral visions of the world, one of which is sort of more traditionalist on the right, and one of which is completely open sexually and in terms of blasphemy, but has very strict, rigorous codes about what you should want sexually and what, whom you should support and believe in and think is good, right? This is why we have all this talk about representation, right? Why is it that you have to have, as the Disney exec recently said, like 50% LGBTQIA characters? Well, it's because they're trying to sell you something, trying to tell you about the way the world should look, what's good, what's honorable, what's noble, what's bad. And if you go against this, you will be censured just the way that you would be if you walked into a church and tried to blaspheme, right? They're just as moralistic about it. It's just that it doesn't look like morality because it's invisible, because it's secular, right? It's like, well, if you say anything bad about trans people, you should be deplatformed. Like, what is that except a strict moral code, which is, they're trying to install in art. So really the fight that we are having is not about whether art is going to have moral character or not. It's about what moral universe we're going to portray and honor in our art. And conservatives, I think, would also do well to remember this. All right, we've got one more one more of these. I don't know what this is. My producers tell me I have to look at it. It's something I have not seen before. I'm a little bit nervous, but they've picked a clip that I will now watch and react to. Hope I didn't readjust it. Damn it. Okay. There we go. And there we go. Should be now recording. That's right, exactly. We can hope. I wonder, can I see this when I'm just here? I cannot. Drat. Okay, well then I'll just have to look at the minutes. Actually, I can see the thing on the camera, so it should be fine. Let's see what, yeah, 2 hours, 1. Great. Okay, great. And I'm gonna take my headphones off also for that reason. Okay. Well, hello. I am Spencer Klavan. Do you feel that you might have wanted, if you had no exposure and come to this podcast, might you want to read the Iliad? Okay. I should stop recording, actually, I guess. All right, that was low. This is like B-side, deep cut, Young Heretics lore. Like if you're a completist, nobody has ever seen that footage before. So when we first started the show, and we didn't quite know how we were going to orchestrate the filming and the creation of it, my producers just gave me a camera. And they just said, like, set this up and do some lighting. And, I've got no idea how to do any of that stuff. So I took it into the studio at Claremont's offices, which is where that is. And I recorded the whole first episode. And they looked at it, they're like, we have to do this again. So there are 2 times that I've done that. I've recorded an episode and we have to completely scrap it and just redo it. It's a terrible feeling, let me tell you, but worth it in the end. I think the other one that we had to scrap was the one on Job, because something went wrong with the machinery. And that one was not my own incompetence. That was just like a technical glitch. And man, I got to the end of that and I thought I'd done such a great job. I was like, yeah, this is going to be a killer episode. And and then they were like, I don't think we got it. So I had to do the whole thing again, which actually I think made it a little bit better. And I really still like that episode. But this was like, baby Spencer getting his legs. And I'm sure that, I hope that one day I will look back on this episode and feel just as embarrassed about it. Because of course you always want to be getting better. Our friends at the Albertus Magnus Institute are offering really one of the best antidotes to the dysfunction of the modern higher education system. They offer an online education that is rooted in the true, the good, and the beautiful. And I'm really excited that they are putting out their inaugural publication. It's called The Sufferings and Glory of Christ, a meditation on Holy Week to Ascension. Now, I have not yet read this book, but if you get it now, you can read it with me over on Locals, because this is a book that is designed to enrich your experience of Holy Week. That's the week at the end of Lent when we journey with Christ to the cross and contemplate the resurrection. So it's a perfect read for this time of year. One more time, it's called The Sufferings and Glory of Christ by Father Owen Carroll, who takes you sort of through the poetry. He says a poetry of Christ crucified that reveals the heart of reality itself. It sounds great. I'm really excited to read and discuss it with you, but you got to go to Amazon or to magnusinstitute.org to pick it up. One more time, it's called The Sufferings and Glory of Christ. Read it with me to cap off this Lent, which I don't know about you, my Lent has been very rich and meaningful, and I'm looking forward to making this my devotional reading for Holy Week at magnusinstitute.org or Amazon, The Sufferings and Glory of Christ. Like I said, we're going to talk about how to, what's going on moving forward over at Locals. You have to be a VIP to hear that announcement. It's youngheretics.com/locals. And you also have to be a VIP in order to ask mailbag questions, which is what we're going to do next. The last thing we wanted to do in this kind of little victory lap episode is take a bonanza mailbag and just quickly take a few different questions about the show itself. So like I say, only VIPs on Locals can ask mailbag questions. I'm going to take a lightning round of different ones. So here's one from Sox Nation. Why didn't you answer my congratulatory DM after the first episode? Okay, I'm actually glad you asked, because this is good to visit and to discuss Why haven't I answered your email, your DM, your text message, your carrier pigeon, your smoke signals? I am just like I just don't have time, and I actually really do like care about love the messages that I get and care about responding to them and try to respond to them if I can. But there is like a bandwidth problem, and I ought to I think just like get more comfortable being like thanks or something. But sometimes I just get overwhelmed. And I think at the time I was like launching the show and there were all these different things going on. But thank you for your congratulatory direct message. I didn't even know that you had sent me one. Here's Steve. What is your favorite episode you've made so far? So I was thinking about this as I was thinking about the development that we were watching of those different episodes. And I think that there's one kind of early on about anacyclosis, the cycle of regimes. It might be episode 6. I can't remember. I was talking about Aeschylus Persians. And I think that was the one where we really like the show kind of crystallized in my mind, like, what is this thing? Because there was just more richness and depth to it. I felt a little bit more comfortable in front of the camera, and that's where I look back and remember, like, yeah, that actually is when we started to have a real thing going here. So that's the one on anacyclosis. I think it's episode 6, early on. Uh, Shane, one, what haven't you covered but most want to? Oh, there's so much, man. The more I do the show, the more I realize there's just like endless material and things that people are like, why haven't you done this? I'm like, I don't know. Why haven't I done that? Only because like, I am trying to lay some groundwork, as I do sort of the more interesting and obscure stuff. Not that the basic stuff isn't interesting, but like, I want you to have like studied every book of the Republic. Like I want to give you like the meat and potato stuff as well. Um, but I really have been wanting to do the Divine Comedy for the longest time. I know that a lot of people want me to do Lord of the Rings, and I definitely will do it and want to do it. Maybe to coincide with the TV show coming out, but the Dante's Divine Comedy is just such a magnificent piece of work. It's really not like central to my wheelhouse in that it's kind of it's obviously not from antiquity, from classical antiquity. But I've been planning a series of 3 on Divine Comedy forever, and it's just one of those ones that there are some topics and some texts that it's like as you approach them, you just feel so. Paradise Lost was like this for me. It's like I know this poem and I love this poem, but it's really daunting to like present it kind of out of the blue. And I feel that way about like so much has been said and written, and so much that is beautiful has been said and written about Dante's Divine Comedy that I've been kind of like working up the nerve, steeling myself to do that one. But soon we will do it. And then another one. What ways might the podcast inch up the asymptote, closing the nearly infinitesimal gap which exists between its current state and its unobtainable ideal form? That was a very graciously phrased question. You're saying, how can it be better? So many things. I think that I've contemplated whether like a longer format. The thing is that like with all the stuff I'm doing, I just don't have time to do a longer format podcast. But I think that we could benefit from just really like not having a time limit at all, kind of just like exploring something endlessly and in endless detail. And I think that there's like some room to grow there, and maybe we'll get longer episodes. Maybe we'll do more long segment episodes or series episodes rather. And I still think I talk too fast, so I think I could slow down. And that has to do with like wanting to get everything out at once. And I think that I'd like to see us continue to like get more context for how all of these things fit together. It's we have to do episodes, and I like doing episodes where we just drill down onto one work. But I'd like for us to do more where we kind of like I was doing today, where we sort of fit all this stuff together. All of that and more is coming up. I cannot express my gratitude to you enough for being with me in this journey. Like I said at the beginning, I am honored that I'm a part of your life. And I hope that you'll continue to let people know about the show, because I really think that this stuff matters. It's why I'm doing it. It's why I'm spending all this time. It's still a passion project, even though it's become, more than that as well. It's just something that, I really believe in putting this out into the world. I hope you do too. I hope you'll share it. I hope you'll become a VIP if you're not already. And if you are, let other people know that they can become one. Here's to more, guys. Can't wait to keep this up with you. As always, I am equally grateful to the Claremont Institute. When I brought the idea for this show to my boss, Ryan, at the Claremont Institute, he was like, "Oh, okay." It's great to have the freedom to do that. And he was like, Are you sure you want to do that?" But he didn't say that. But I guess what I'm saying is like, you know, when I came and said that, they were just so open to it. It was like, sure, why not? Like, off you go, you know? And the freedom to do that and the support of an institution that believes in the American idea, that believes in the best of the West, and believes in seeing that lived out in the here and now in this country, is such a blessing. I count my blessings every day with gratitude that I wake up working for Claremont. And if you haven't become familiar yet with their work, you really ought to. It's the Claremont Review of Books and the American Mind, both online, and CRB also has a physical copy. Go check us out and donate to support us at claremont.org/donate. All right, folks, that's it for me, and you know what comes next. I will see you next week for more truth, beauty, and the stuff that matters.